Welcome to mediatorpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about mediation, negotiation, and collaboration. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a valuation expert and divorce financial mediator in St. Louis, Missouri. I am talking to Beth McCormack today, and she's a divorce and family law partner at Beerman LLP in Chicago. And she focuses on highly complex family law matters. She also has an experience in complex litigation, as well as mediation and collaborative law, which basically means she handles a whole bunch of stuff having to do with money. But today we're actually talking about negotiation beyond the zeros. And so this is high net worth divorce strategy, but it's also starting to get us to, is this $1 million divorce? Is this a multi-million-dollar divorce or a billion-dollar divorce? And I think for most people who are in mediation or even litigation as an expert mediator or attorney, we all get blinded by these numbers, right? Like I pulled up one on Friday that literally was like, I even fell out of my chair, like the size of the business, right? I get a little bit overwhelmed by business value as opposed to all value. But just setting the stage, like you are so involved with cases that are even beyond my imagination. And I want to just kind of level set, like, what are you seeing in this space? Are you seeing these really high net worth divorces settling? Are they staying married? Are they doing mediation? Are they fighting? Are we having narcissists? Like, give us kind of a lay of what you're seeing happen in this space. And welcome, Beth. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I am blown away by all of your questions because the answer is mostly yes. So I am seeing it all, and mostly in a good way. I think you and I have watched society evolve a little bit, notwithstanding what's going on politically. We don't go there, but there is a tone, and there's in the world right now that is heavy and dark. And I feel like sometimes people want to be able to control their outcomes, and they're coming to us, with the idea that maybe they do want to mediate because they want to have control over their end game. And if you're a billionaire, a millionaire, or not, you want that control if you really dig deep into what you want in life. Even if you don't go to mediation with the idea that you're trying to salvage whatever family means to you, I think the main thing people want in mediation is to control their outcome. So it doesn't matter how wealthy they are, but what I'm getting at is they are flocking now to mediation for whatever reason. But what I'm hearing often is, I can't control what happens tax-wise. I can't control X, Y, and Z. This I can control.
Well, and when we talk about mediation has a whole bunch of context, and you talk a lot about like attorney supported mediation. And when we're talking about high net worth divorce strategy, we're not talking about, mom and pop mediation where we're sitting down. This is really like a lot of team is involved, and then we're coming together to work through it. So what is really this sort of attorney guided, like this middle ground between litigation and mediation that you really focus on?
I believe that in certain instances, you have to have your attorney present. If there's an imbalance of power, knowledge being power, sometimes there's true domestic violence. I know we have our own, I'm sure you've had podcasts on that, on how to screen for that. But the bottom line is, all of the work I do is attorney assisted mediation, meaning I don't send people to mediation without me being present. Sometimes on parenting issues, I feel like some people feel like they know what's in their children's best interest. They're pretty aligned. They don't necessarily need the lawyers there to talk about where the children rest their head or who's doing what holiday. So that's sometimes an exception and sometimes not. I still do some of that. But in the high net worth side, having an attorney at a minimum present is crucial. Very often, we call in business valuators. Sometimes they're actually present in the mediation. Sometimes that's a neutral business valuation expert. Sometimes it's 2 business valuation experts and a mediator and 2 lawyers, and we're teasing it all out. Ideally, we have all kinds of experts maybe on each side, obviously accountants, tax strategists, estate planning lawyers, the wealth managers. The more we can get everyone aligned, the more productive we are. But each side should have their own experts if we're talking about anything substantial, and that is probably 5 million and up. You really need to have a team approach.
Well, and I think that if people are in mediation and they're in divorce mediation and they're thinking that mostly mediation is covering these simple divorces, that's not really the case. It's sort of like even a decade ago, we started doing mediation and hot tubbing. The experts would call it hot tubbing, and or one of the judges, I think Judge Laro or something, called it that. And he was really an estate, there's like the estate court, and then there's the divorce court. And the reality in these big divorces, we might have prenups, we might have estate trust issue, like trust, not like, yes, we don't trust each other either, but estates and trust issues. And so having all the players together is actually how the majority of mediation that I've seen in high net worth is that both have attorneys, both have experts, and you're really coming together for an entire day and like multiple days. This isn't a 2-hour thing. It's not a 4-hour thing. This is like multiple days where you're just taking and eating like an elephant in one bite. And so you guys, so there's a role for everyone in this purpose, right? And the mediator, can you kind of tell us, like, how do you view the mediator's role when you're there as really advocating for your client? How are you strategizing to go into that mediation?
So the mediator's the process person, right? So I feel like typically mediators are chosen by the 2 lawyers, at least in the Chicagoland area. And just to be clear, I do the ultra high net worth divorces all over the country in that I consult. Sometimes I play the lawyer role, the mediator role, sometimes just consulting with the family office to help them find the right people in each jurisdiction. The idea being these people of substantial means want to protect not only their wealth, but their emotional capital that they've built all these years. They had an intact family. They were high functioning on whatever level that means at some point, and they don't want to give all their resources and their emotion over to a system, i.e. litigation or whatever. So when we choose the mediator, it's like, who can handle a divorce of this magnitude? So, mediators, at least in Illinois, there's no vetting. So anybody can put up a shingle of a mediator, believe it or not. So if you're in an ultra high net worth situation, you need to have a lawyer, probably designation, a retired judge, a CPA. Sometimes people talk about CDFA. Again, it's less about credentials to me. It's all about knowledge. And maybe none of those designations, if they've been mediating divorce and ultra high net worth cases for years, it's less about the credentials, because the mediator is just a facilitator. They're bringing the conversations forth. They're not making decisions. They're not deciding outcomes. They're managing the process. So my strategy is to sit and listen and let the mediator kind of tell us how he or she thinks we should go. I think a good lawyer learns when to not talk. Sometimes that's hard for clients because they're like, what are you doing? You're not fighting for me. It's not time to fight. It's time to listen and get a lay of our land and figure out what's next. So I think a real big common thing that keeps mediation successful in our jurisdiction is there's a lot of planning meetings with just professionals before the clients come. And the clients appreciate that. We have processed it to death. We know, it's not scripting it, but we know what our individual clients' triggers are. And we've talked to the mediator about that. They have met with the clients individually. They've done their screening. So by the time we're sitting in a mediation, and to your point, sometimes they're all-day mediations. Many people find that to be diminishing returns after 3 or 4 hours. Again, you've got to get to know the clients. If there's one person that could go 12 hours and one that can do 3, you figure out what works. Do we want to do 5 hours and see how one holds up? You just try everything in order for them to be successful. Because each session, if you don't have success, somebody's going to walk away.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because you've already said at least one thing that may have been lost in when people were listening to it, but there are some nuances or differences in dealing with billion-dollar divorces. And that's when you're talking about ultra high net worth, you're talking about billion-dollar divorces. And if you're not seeing big million-dollar divorces, the odds are you're not seeing that. But an interesting thing that you just said is that, and maybe people missed it, is that you are conducting meetings with all of the players and the billionaire is not there. And so for most of the times, a millionaire, right, in some capacity is going to be present, is going to be there for all of the meetings. Like, I want to know what's happening and all of these things. You're talking about some things that happen before anything else happens. What are some of the other things that are differences, or how are they not different? Wherever you want to go first.
It's based upon the client's needs. So we have, typically people who are in the billionaire column got there and are self-made, sometimes not. If they're not, and they've had a family office run their lives for the majority of their life, even going back to when they were children, a lot of times those cases, we represent people in that place, and we represent stars and people that everybody wants to know about. We, of course, share nothing. They don't want to touch their divorce. Somebody just figure it out, because they have accountants, they have lawyers that are not divorce lawyers, and they want them to all come with a package and tell me what does this look like. That's one extreme. The client needs to be present, at least in the background. It's not like a whole deal is negotiated, but the reality is some just want complete hands off. And some are like, what are you guys talking about in preparing? What are you saying without me? Because they're used to controlling everything. So we meet the client's needs as best we can. And we explain to them, not unlike court, you have to prepare. The lawyer has to prepare. You're not going to be present for every preparation. So if the mediator wants just the professionals there, most clients get that that's an advantage to them, because the mediator is spending time with the accountants, with the divorce lawyer, with the estate planning lawyer, trying to tease it out, because they're facilitating the conversation about what do we do with this. So that's more typical in a billion-dollar case. And again, these are differences with distinctions without a difference, whatever the saying goes. If you're somebody who has 100 million or $1 billion, you need all of these advisors. And it's just a matter of, what's the $1 billion? Is it 500 million in a business and then the rest of it is cash? That's a whole different divorce. So it's meeting the client's needs, less about how many zeros are on the balance sheet.
Well, and I think in general, when you get into the high net worth situation, you are kind of a service provider. You're like the ultimate service provider. And for the most part, you're not having the client do a lot of anything, and their people are really protecting them. How do you, as like the lead attorney, because I think there's a couple issues that I've seen in these, is that one, where are they going to file? Because they have multiple houses. And then how do you kind of maintain your control over the process when you have so many of these people involved?
So filing alone, that could be a whole podcast on what establishes residency. So again, if a couple's really working together and rowing in the same direction, they choose the jurisdiction together. Again, I'm an Illinois licensed divorce attorney, and we have lawyers licensed in most states. That's one fact. But I may form a team if lawyers often have what's called a conflict of laws conversation with other lawyers. So we're strategizing behind the scenes for our individual clients. A California divorce, a common law state, is completely different than an Illinois divorce. We can all adapt, we can pivot, but one person may love a common law divorce, which is, to shortcut, a 50-50 division of assets that were accumulated during the marriage. That is not the entire definition. I'm shortcutting for our purposes. That might really play to someone's advantage. And then Illinois happens to be an equitable distribution state where it could be wildly disproportionate division of assets based upon one's ability to earn more income post-divorce, et cetera, contribution. That may be really beneficial to another person. Well, then you have full out litigation battles over which state it should be and what's residency, or you put your heads together and say, all right, you've got this argument, you've got this argument. We have enough money for 5 generations. Let's now turn it into kind of an estate planning conversation. We both want to leave wealth for the kids? Maybe not. Maybe one person's completely adverse to that and wants to give all the money to charity. Again, these are the conversations at a very high level that people have together, if they choose to.
Yeah, and I think that those are the complexities that people don't understand, that mediation gives them the capability to do that. And there are so many issues, though, that billionaires kind of fight about in divorce that most people wouldn't even consider. And I think that this is kind of an interesting, because, one of the reasons that I really liked when we spoke about this is that you kind of look at everybody the same, like you're just looking at this process, but there are issues that people will fight about a little bit more that might be completely different. And I don't know if there's any that come to mind that. Okay.
So, some fun ones that people like to hear about that, just in general, we've got 1 private jet, we've got 3, we've got 5, whatever it is. Are we fighting over the jet? Are we fighting over jet hours? Are we fighting over yachts? Are we fighting over, some things that are unimaginable to those of us who are grinding it out and working hard every day? And not that those people aren't, but it's just a lifestyle. Sometimes the lifestyles take my breath away, to your point, Melissa. Every now and again, you read a balance sheet and you can't grasp it. But here we go, we have to. And so we are faced with people who are fighting over what food is on what private jet. Is the kid furious because it was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as they had to take the jet cross country? These are real conversations that I've heard about. Mm-hmm. Well, that's that family's need. I can't laugh at it. I can't make fun of it. That's their need. If it's, the $10 million condo in Florida versus the $40 million home on the Cape, everybody's got their story. And what we try to do is just normalize it. But it can be challenging, and you just have to facilitate the hard conversations between them, because it's unimaginable to us, but they need to talk through it. Another issue in billionaire cases is philanthropy. Again, do we divide money and then donate whatever you want to do separately post-divorce, or do we want to do it as a family? Are we a foundation? Were we a foundation as a family before? Is there an emotional reason why we want to stay that? A lot of these people have buildings named after them and museums, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of emotion around naming rights and some things that we just can't grasp.
Well, and I think in a lot of these situations, you're going to have estate attorneys, you're going to have, all of the agreements that could be in place. But in some of these, because you said that a lot of these billionaires are self-made, then, are you really looking at a 50-50 split, or is everybody, because in those types of situations, like if I were the spouse of a self-made and we did it all during the marriage, these are big dollars. Like, are you saying I just take enough, or, do I get half kind of thing? And if it's not self-made, it's another totally different story, right?
And it may be a different story emotionally. It may be a different story legally. If the business was built during the marriage, most jurisdictions consider it marital and divide it some 50-50 and some equitably. The point often is, it's my business. Leave it alone. It's mine. Well, you happen to work it and you built it, but I supported you over here. And so I have rights as well in most jurisdictions that may be different. But sometimes it's the emotional acknowledgement that I did have a role in building our business, not directly, but if you acknowledge my role, I don't know that I need half. I just need to know that I might be entitled to it and maybe I don't want it. You and I talked in our preparation. Very often we have to have our own CYA, for lack of a better word, notes from people who just didn't want to fight and walk away from what they might be entitled to. We don't stand in their way. We just have to tell them legally what they're entitled to. And often they choose not to have the fight.
Yeah, and that might be a little bit leading into this, is that, we are sitting in these positions of these really high net worth divorces and saying, okay, where is the fight? Where are the issues? Where is there a completely different value or perception of value? And do you think that there's different negotiation tactics between like $1 million divorce and $1 billion divorce?
It's interesting because as recently as this morning, I had a conversation with a lawyer on the other side of a case. And for those listeners who aren't seeing us, I'm using air quotes because on the other side in mediation it's a nuance, right? I feel like if we're a team, are we a real team? In collaborative law, you're a real team. In mediation, you're not. So anyway, these are distinctions that do matter. And in that conversation, there was a discussion around the business and its valuation separately from the balance sheet, the marital balance sheet. And how do they compare? Because the billion may be $3 billion in a business, and some families intentionally hold very little by comparison in other assets.
Right.
Some families have, real estate holdings that are in the hundreds of millions. And there's some ways that we can balance on a balance sheet something that makes some sense. It just depends on the case. So whether it's million or billion really just depends on what kind of asset. Because in divorces of any magnitude, you have to make sure you're dividing apples and apples. Because if you're dividing apples and oranges and the tax implications, et cetera, there's a very big difference.
Well, even just the real estate alone, I think, because most of it's going to be investment, most of it's going to be some sort of tax situation. And I think you see a lot more tax sheltering, obviously, in larger corporations. And so it also gives the appearance that, there's maybe not as much cash flow or the money is left in the business. So when you're going into this and you're kind of developing this strategy, are you always talking to people about mediation as a possibility? Because even as you talk, I'm like, I could see how collaborative law could be a really good thing, because you're kind of locking in the privacy, you're locking them into the, because in my mind, I guess, when you leave collaborative, you would have to hire a whole new team. That would be like a big cost to keep them in. So are you seeing them like collaborative or want mediate? Because mediation is kind of the Wild West. So we have more control over doing things in mediation. But is there a role for collaborative in this process too?
I would say there's definitely a role for collaborative, but I have a really, really tough screening process for obvious reasons. For those listeners who don't know, if you're not successful in a collaborative law matter, you start over with all new counsel, all new valuators, et cetera, et cetera. That is a motivator often that just keeps people at the table. That alone keeps people at the table, which is sometimes an added plus for collaborative law, sometimes not. I have clients who are like, there's no way I'm signing a participation agreement if I lose you. And I'll be like, but there's other great lawyers that are, so I personally believe collaborative law is appropriate in ultra high net worth matters because you're promising to one another, committing as a team member to problem solve at the table, to not threaten court, to not talk about having a judge come in and tell us something. We can figure this out. We're smarter than anybody here because we know our family and we know our business and we know our values and our priorities. So I offer all options to all clients. We have a duty to do that, I believe, as lawyers. I'm not going to sit here and tell you litigation, collaborative, or mediation. Sorry.
That's okay.
I do think clients need to be told what all the options are, and they get to weigh the pros and cons to each. So I think a billionaire divorce and a collaborative matter, I've done many. I think that can be very helpful. But knowing that if they're not successful, they're starting over completely. And I have one case in particular that it's like anything in life. Once they failed in collaborative, I've had one failure, which is all about the screening.
Right.
And once they failed, they litigate every decision, and it's horrifying emotionally. They can afford to litigate. Of course they can litigate. But emotionally, they have just destroyed one another. And that in turn obviously affects the children.
Well, and how often, because, we had a situation and, it was a pretty difficult situation. We thought we did a really good job at prevailing, and it was through kind of mediation through the court system, like in tandem with trial dates and things like that. And we got to a situation where we thought the client got a tremendous amount of cash, right? Not stuff, but actual cash. And that's what we always want to get. And this particular client literally left the courthouse sobbing, like just crying. Like it was the worst thing that ever happened because she didn't get any of the things. And, looking back on it, when we talked to the narcissistic coach and they said, you didn't do one thing. And I was like, what did we not do? And they're like, you should have worked on unattaching the person from the stuff, from the jets, from the cars, from the boats and the houses and things like that, because she didn't see it the same. She didn't see the cash the same as the stuff. So do you see that you're getting in a situation where you're having to bring other therapists in? Because a lot of times they might have their own therapists.
Okay, Melissa, I do not represent clients who don't have a therapist or a coach. No. And I'll give you a real life example as to why on that and why they also have to have a financial advisor, an independent wealth advisor. So I worked with a woman who was getting $50,000 a month. I did not represent her in the divorce. This is what's called post-decree. She came to me because she was running out of money. No one spent a minute with her explaining why her lifestyle did not allow for her to have $50,000 a month. It was a great award of support. To most humans, it's astronomical.
Right.
And the lifestyle they had acquired, it didn't come close to meeting her needs, but no one talked to her about that. And back to your point on detaching from stuff, in this particular case, she wanted that family home. Well, it had carrying costs alone of $35,000 a month. Well, that doesn't leave a lot for handbags and travel, but no one talked to her about that, to your point, as a coach or a therapist, and more importantly, a financial advisor.
Well, and I think that is a self-preservation for some of us as the provider, and even working with somebody that's like a divorce coach, because I'm like, no, we're not trying to rehabilitate you.
Nope.
I literally need somebody to kind of hold your hand through this process because the emotions are overwhelming. And the more money you're really, yes, there's enough to go around, but you're leaving that world, you're leaving that lifestyle.
Yeah.
Is there other kind of challenging things of how to manage the team or expert, or are you seeing that, like we've seen sometimes where you might have like a New York attorney, like you're in Chicago. So yes, maybe you're facilitating in Chicago, but you might have a New York attorney because they're going to file in New York or California, because you see a lot of ultra high net worth are probably going to the outskirts of the country for their primary residence or anything. So do you see kind of a team approach with attorneys from different jurisdictions? If you have a lot of property, are you kind of leading that team? Because there becomes a lot of cooks in the kitchen, if you will.
There do. That's a very common theme and problem. Back to the therapy versus coach thing, I got to share with you, a colleague here in Chicago came up with this, not me. A therapist helps you unpack and repack your luggage 3, 5, 10 times before you go on vacation. A coach picks up your bag and walks you through the airport. And that is a beautiful way to explain why you need sometimes both, because you got to unpack it. No one's denying if you don't unpack it, you're going to keep doing it in the future. But that's not helping a divorce case, because you're getting mired down in all the what happened. A coach is helping you look forward and make decisions that are in your best interest. So to your point, in all jurisdictions, I think a divorce coach is helpful. But in the ultra high net worth space and helping people stay aligned with what their values are, et cetera, I feel like that's most crucial. Obviously, in whatever jurisdiction I'm working in, I have to have the legal, whomever, if it's local counsel, all the way to a local mediator. There's different ways we form teams. I had a case in Florida. It was two women, and they had to flip a coin over who got Beth. And I'm like, no, because I had built the relationship with both of them, but I also didn't feel equipped to be their mediator, given that there's a reason for that too. The bottom line is they both trusted me to find them the right lawyers in that jurisdiction. So I thought, okay, I help you find the lawyers. They're like, you're not leaving us. So I was their facilitator to help keep the lawyers in line when the lawyer may take one or both of them down rabbit holes. Because they're like, you're going to preserve, I knew their common goal was to have a post-divorce relationship, amicable relationship. So they wanted me to manage the lawyers and ensure they didn't take them down some dark paths. That, again, they have all the money imaginable. So, this business, they had two different businesses. Anyway, I loved that they both wanted me, but I wasn't equipped. So I found the right team members in that jurisdiction.
Well, and I think that that's one of the keys that I've also seen is like the collaborative law model has some benefits to it, like having a team approach, having a consistent team, I've also seen is also really helpful. But, like thinking you can do it, obviously in these situations and you can't do it yourself, but in any of these divorces, it's like, how important is of it as an attorney, is it for you to understand the numbers, and even just understand where there is an issue, and how important is that? Or do you always kind of just make sure you have the experts involved as well?
That's a great question, Melissa. I think a good lawyer knows how to spot issues and bring in the experts. I've often said, because people can sometimes minimize what it means to be a divorce lawyer, and we have to know a little bit about everything. On the financial side, we have to have a basic understanding of everything, and sometimes a much more intricate knowledge. Psychology. If you don't understand the psychology of money, and if you don't understand the impact of these things, as you pointed out, on these families, I don't think you're serving your clients well. So I do think, though, very often for me, it's the issue spotting. Just as recently as yesterday in a ultra high net worth case, the issue of estate planning had always come up. The issue, we had dotted I's and crossed T's, And I had an aha moment of, we have not discussed in the event of disability, because there's an insurability question in the case. Well, if you're not getting life insurance, you're certainly not getting disability coverage. So how are we going to protect this maintenance, alimony, whatever word is used in your jurisdiction? How are we going to protect that client's interest in that? So sometimes we have to have really hard conversations and spot that issue. It's not mine to solve. I've got to go to an insurance expert, maybe. We've got to get creative. So.
Well, and I think on these complex divorces, what I've seen is when you have their whole team, right? So they have an estate attorney who's done the estate. They have a trust attorney that's handled the trust. Like everybody has their lane. And, sometimes gifts, like recently we asked an accountant one question: where are the gift tax returns? And they were just like, whoa, we've never done that. Thank you. Because there were all these gifts that were supposedly to happen that never actually happened. Yeah. So what I think is that sometimes we're actually pulling together all these little niche specialists, and they're actually all kind of made too, right? Because they're the best, all of this best team, these not best friends, but definitely like this is their main salary. And this is who they serve every single day. And so they're telling you what they think that you should know about the financials. Yeah. And unless you get them all together, they're going to talk, they're going to tell you misconstrued information that's conflicting. And they don't even know, I didn't know that the trust attorney had done something over here. I just handled the tax return. They handled the gift tax return, and then somebody else handled the business. So I think even correlating the fact that each of the experts and the participants have a narrative that they're trying to convey on behalf of their client.
Spot on, Melissa. And it's funny because the beauty of Zoom negotiations now, it used to be we'd all get in a conference room and maybe you have 6 people in the conference room. Well, in cases like what you're talking about, you could have 12, 15 people, and the physical meeting in a room was overwhelming. On Zoom, what it looks like with, 12, 15 people, to your point, all having their own agenda, so to speak. But it's great for the couple to sit and watch it and listen. They're processing as much as they can. Again, ideally, coaches are there to help them take in the information because, as you know, it's humans. When we're overwhelmed, we only take in so much information. So processing it outside of that meeting, but what they can't do is forget about what it looked like to see 14 professionals on the screen all talking around each other. And it may be an hour, it may be 5 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I think the more the professionals get how overwhelming that is, the better we're serving them.
Well, yeah. And I don't think people realize, that's an expensive call, right? But that doesn't really matter because the amount of time that you save, if that estate attorney says one sentence that changes, because most of the time people are valuing things for like strategic purposes. Like they have internal valuations that are like, this is worth $100 million. I was like, buddy, have you ever taken out $1 million a year? Well, no. Well, okay. I don't know if that's the real, so they have these kind of all these spreadsheets and all this information, but sometimes it's also misleading. And the other side has seen it as well, and it's like people have kind of made this. What I think though you're saying in a lot of situations is that you are hyper prepping them even for mediation. Like you're prepping, everybody is prepping so that and then you kind of give an overview of the client and then go into mediation, where I'm just telling people to simply prep for mediation. And that is the way, basically what you're saying for high net worth. Like you have hours and hours and hours to understand the financials, even if they're documented with professionals, right?
That's right. That's right.
Now, do you see a lot of tracing of any separate assets happen in this situation?
We definitely deal with tracing issues. I have a cool story that might resonate with you or listeners. So in most jurisdictions, there's something, in Illinois, we call it dissipation, where any money spent on a non-marital purpose while the marriage is undergoing a breakdown. So in those cases, you can spend hours, millions, or not millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars teasing out how much money was spent somewhere else, i.e., a girlfriend, drugs, an addiction issue, sex, whatever. All of that money would have to be repaid to the marriage. Well, the money's one issue. The emotion is the bigger issue. And in that case, the woman I happen to represent came up with the concept of, I'm not spending a minute on a professional teasing all that out. I don't know. I don't want to know. It won't feel good to me. I'll never feel okay. What I want is a healing fund. She came up with the title herself, and she said, I don't know how much it is, but I do know that I want you to pay me something that's just for me. She said, I may choose to go on a retreat. I may choose to open up a business. I may choose to go abroad and paint for 2 years, whatever. I don't know. Well, guess what the challenge is? How much? Because in her mind, she may have thought a ginormous number, or he feared that. Well, guess what? Every professional said nothing, not one word, silence. The two of them had to have the conversation. And what happens in silence when you're professionals is eventually somebody's uncomfortable. And we were coached by the coaches in this conversation to just shut up. And I'll be damned if they didn't come up with it. And he later learned that if he offered her $10,000, it was going to be enough. If he offered her $400,000, it was enough. If he offered her $4 million, it was enough. She didn't care. It wasn't about the money. It was about him. What am I worth to heal from whatever mistakes you've done? I don't want to line it up with how much was spent. I simply want to know what it's worth to you. He threw out the number. She accepted it that moment, and we were done.
That is probably the best healing story that I have heard. And I think that is a great way to look at it, because for the most part, the conversation that I'm having with people is that, yes, we can go down that path. Yes, it's going to cost a lot of money. Are you sure that there's are you sure there's a girlfriend? Are you sure there's this? And there's so much emotion wrapped up in it. I'm like, this is a $20 million divorce, right? And we're going to look for $100,000. And I know that that's important to you, or 200,000. And I know that that's important to you, but is it, right? Because could we just, if we saw a couple things happening, could we make up that number? I'm not saying to make up numbers, but I'm just saying sometimes making up that number is going to cost less than finding the number. And then we get to court and everybody's like, oh, I brought all my data to show how much. And the judge is like, yeah, I don't care.
They don't.
I don't care. But we're talking about 10 million, and you're a rounding issue right now. So you want $100,000 more, and then you look greedy. And that's the hard part, is it's I just want what's fair, and I'm trying to get what's fair, but the impression leaves it oh, it's not enough to get the 5 million. You want a little bit more. And it's no, I want what's fair. I think that's the hard part, because in even more wealthy divorces, you're not going to get 50-50. You're going to get enough, and you're probably going to have to stop it there because they're not liquid, right? And those are the types of things that people, I don't think, would totally know. But tell us a little bit about you, how people could reach out to you. You're brilliant. You're almost untouchable. We're lucky that we even have you on here.
You're sweet. You're sweet.
So tell us about, you're in Chicago, you're doing things around the country though, because these divorces, I'm telling you, I've only seen a few in my career, and they were tangential, right? We all knew that they were happening. And if you got into it, you were literally one of 100, it felt like, experts. So I was like, I'm just going to have a bit part. I want a big part of this. So it's a little bit different, but is that all you focus on, or, like where else does your practice in your law firm focus?
Thank you. So we are Beerman Law, and we are actually the biggest family law firm in the country. So with that comes a lot of expertise in all kinds of divorces, all the way from litigation, collaborative, mediation, et cetera. But and we also have attorneys licensed all over the country so that we can understand all the different jurisdictions. So having said that, just because I've practiced so long, I'm doing the ultra high net worth cases, but my firm is built on everyday people who work really hard, and we have to train young lawyers in all kinds of the matters. So back to the psychology, the numbers, et cetera. So we do cops and firemen and teachers just like everybody else. Those cases are just as important to us, but I, just because of doing it so long, do the more complex matters, because that's what challenges me at this age, to still want to do it.
Well, and I think that what we know is that as you go up into the higher net worth issues, they're more financially complex. And, it's almost like if you don't see it and you don't catch it, no one is. And so you really do have to work with people that have a depth of knowledge. And I will say that people who are doing these divorces are going at national talent. Like they're not just like, oh, who's in my backyard?
They're actually avoiding their backyard obviously for privacy reasons. Most of my multi-jurisdictional cases come from, no one in San Francisco is going to look at my business. No way, no how. And we all think of, oh, it's just a city. No, all of us are small towns. Chicago's the biggest small town in America. We all know each other on some level. So I think often it's just to keep away from the local talent.
And this goes back to what you said, which is sometimes when somebody like that walks through the door, everybody's like, oh, hi, this is going to be my career making Kate, like you really have to just look at these as like, I assume that each case is going to be similar and I'm going to get paid kind of similar unless there's complications, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do appreciate you. I don't know if there's any other suggestions that you have or tips, but we enjoyed all of your, I learned a lot, I know.
Good, I did too.
And if there's ever any other new topics, or you write a book, or you become, the court TV person, we would love to have you back. But for right now, you do a lot of good work behind closed doors, and we appreciate hearing about it.
That's the most important thing. Find a lawyer with discretion who doesn't get easily rattled or excited about who you are. Just take care of everyone.
I love it. Well, thanks you, Beth. I appreciate it.
Thank you.